She fed a dying stranger in secret every night, thinking no one would ever know. What she didn't realize, the stranger was an ancient vampire protected by royal law, and the vampire king had been watching her break it for months. He arrived at her diner with a choice: punish her mercy, or question every law he'd spent centuries enforcing. The thermos was warm in Maya's hands, but what was inside had never seen heat. She walked past the empty booths of the Moonlight Diner, her sneakers squeaking against the checkered floor. The clock above the register read 2:47 a.m. Outside, the highway stretched dark and silent. No cars.
No witnesses.
Just her, the hum of the old refrigerator, and the woman in booth 7. Mrs. Holloway sat where she always sat, back to the wall, facing the door. Her hands were folded on the table, thin as kindling, covered in skin that looked like wax paper held up to light. She wore the same purple cardigan she'd worn for 3 months straight. Her eyes were still sharp, still alive in a way the rest of her wasn't. "You're late tonight," Mrs. Holloway said softly.
Sorry.
Had to wait for Danny to leave. Maya glanced back toward the kitchen. Her manager had finally gone home 20 minutes ago, muttering about inventory. "He's been staying later lately. I think he suspects I'm stealing food." "Are you?" Maya smiled despite herself. "Not food." She slid into the booth across from Mrs. Holloway and placed the thermos between them. It sat there like a secret, like a bomb. Mrs. Holloway stared at it but didn't reach for it. "How many nights now, Maya?" 83. "You've been counting. Shouldn't I?" Mrs. Holloway's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite anything. Most humans don't count kindness. They just do it and forget. "Maybe I'm not most humans." "No," Mrs. Holloway said quietly. "You're really not." She finally reached for the thermos. Her hands trembled as she unscrewed the lid. The smell didn't rise, it never did. Whatever was inside didn't behave like normal liquid. It didn't steam. It didn't evaporate. It simply was dark and thick and absolutely forbidden. Maya had learned not to look directly at it. Mrs. Holloway lifted the thermos to her lips and drank in small, careful sips. Her throat moved. Her eyes closed. For just a moment, color touched her cheeks, faint, fleeting, like a memory of life. When she set the thermos down, her hands were steadier. "It's getting harder to find," Maya said, keeping her voice low even though they were alone. "The blood bank switched suppliers. New security cameras. I had to wait 3 extra days last week." Mrs. Holloway's eyes opened. The sharpness in them had turned to something else. Something sad. Then stop. "What?" "Stop bringing it. Stop stealing it. Stop risking yourself for a dead woman." Maya leaned forward. "You're not dead. I'm not alive either. Not in any way that matters." Mrs. Holloway's voice was steady, but there was an edge beneath it, something old and tired and final. "What you're doing for me, it's kind. It's more than kind. But it's also illegal." "Illegal according to who?" "According to laws written in blood 1,000 years before your country existed." Mrs. Holloway's fingers tightened around the thermos. "The hunger laws are absolute, Maya. No human feeds a vampire without explicit consent. No vampire survives beyond their usefulness to the covens. And no act of mercy goes unpunished if it disrupts the order." Maya had heard pieces of this before, but never said with such weight. "What order?" "You live alone in a building that's falling apart. You don't hurt anyone. You barely exist in their world anymore." "Exactly." Mrs. Holloway's voice cut through the air like glass. "I barely exist. That's the point. I was supposed to fade away 15 years ago. Starve quietly. Disappear into dust and memory. But you," she shook her head slowly. "You keep pulling me back." "Good."
No.
"Dangerous." Mrs. Holloway leaned closer, and for the first time in 83 nights, Maya saw real fear in her eyes. "Every time you feed me, it sends out a signal. Not a loud one. Not obvious. But it's there, a ripple in the old magic. And if it gets loud enough, if it lasts long enough," she stopped. Swallowed. "He'll come." Maya's heartbeat kicked up a notch.
Who?
Mrs. Holloway didn't answer right away. She looked toward the diner's front window, toward the empty parking lot and the dark road beyond. The streetlight outside flickered once.
Twice.
Then stayed dark. "The king," Mrs. Holloway whispered. The temperature in the diner dropped. Not enough to see your breath. Just enough to feel it in your bones. "What king?" Maya asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "The only one that matters," Mrs. Holloway's voice was barely audible now. "The one who enforces the old laws. The one who decides what mercy looks like and what it costs." She turned back to Maya, and her expression was something beyond fear. It was resignation. "If he smells this kindness, Maya, if he traces it back to you, he will come. And when he does, no one will be able to stop what happens next." Maya's throat went dry. "Are you saying he'd kill me?" "I'm saying he'd make you wish he had." They sat in silence. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pipe dripped. Finally, Maya stood. She took the empty thermos and screwed the lid back on. "Same time Thursday?" Mrs. Holloway stared at her. "You're not listening." "I heard every word." "Then why?" "Because you matter," Maya said simply. "And I don't care what some ancient vampire king thinks about it." She walked back toward the kitchen, her heart pounding but her step steady. Behind her, Mrs. Holloway's voice followed, soft and sad and certain. "He's already coming, Maya. I can feel it. The air tastes different tonight." Maya paused at the kitchen door. She didn't turn around. "Then I guess we'll deal with him when he gets here." She disappeared into the back, leaving Mrs. Holloway alone in booth 7. The old woman sat very still, her hands folded again on the table. And outside, in the parking lot, the burnt black shape of a symbol that hadn't been there an hour ago smoked faintly against the asphalt. It looked like a crown. It looked like a warning. Maya found the apartment building by following the smell of old rain and forgotten things. It stood 3 blocks from the diner, a narrow brick structure wedged between a laundromat and a boarded-up movie theater. The marquee still had letters on it, random and meaningless now. RT Imende HO. Someone had tried to spell something once. Time had taken the rest. Mrs. Holloway's apartment was on the 3rd floor.
No elevator.
The stairs creaked like they were trying to tell secrets. Maya knocked twice, then once more. Their pattern. The door opened immediately, as if Mrs. Holloway had been standing right behind it. "You shouldn't have come during daylight," she said, but she stepped aside to let Maya in. The apartment was smaller than Maya expected. One main room serving as bedroom, kitchen, and living space all at once. A narrow bathroom door hung crooked on its hinges. The windows were covered in thick curtains that looked older than Maya's grandmother. No sunlight came through, not even a crack. But it was the walls that made Maya stop. They were covered in writing. Not posters. Not photographs. Writing. Scratched directly into the plaster with something sharp. Words in languages Maya didn't recognize, spiraling from floor to ceiling.
Dates. Names.
Symbols that hurt to look at too long. "I've been documenting," Mrs. Holloway said quietly, following Maya's gaze. "Everything I remember. Before I forget it all." "Forget what?" "Who I was. What I did." She moved to a small table near the window and sat down slowly, as if her bones were negotiating with gravity.
Seat.
"If you're going to keep risking your life, you should at least know what you're risking it for." Maya sat across from her. The chair wobbled. Mrs. Holloway folded her hands, the same way she did at the diner. "The hunger laws were written in 1247. I know because I helped write them." Maya blinked. "You're over 700 years old. 762 this past spring. Though I stopped celebrating around century 3-inch, Mrs. Holloway's expression didn't change. "I wasn't always this.
Weak.
Forgotten. Once I was a magistrate, a lawkeeper for the Eastern Covens. We created rules to keep our kind from being hunted into extinction. To make us disciplined. Sustainable." She gestured to the wall behind her, where 3 lines were carved deeper than the rest. "No human feeds without consent. No vampire survives beyond usefulness. No mercy disrupts the order." I wrote the second one myself, Mrs. Holloway said. I thought it was wisdom. Efficiency. If you couldn't contribute, if you couldn't hunt, couldn't fight, couldn't serve the covens, then you faded. It kept us strong. Maya's stomach turned. You wrote your own death sentence. Yes, the word came out flat.
Empty.
I just didn't realize it at the time. None of us did. We were building a future. We didn't understand we were also building a graveyard. She stood and moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just an inch. A thin slice of gray daylight cut across her hand. Her skin smoked faintly, and she let the curtain fall. When I grew too old to hunt, they retired me, honored me with isolation, gave me a pension of blood once a month, and told me to fade with dignity. Her voice hardened.
Dignity.
As if starving slowly is dignified. As if being erased by your own laws is an honor. Maya's throat felt tight. Why didn't you fight it? I tried. I appealed to the coven masters. I reminded them of my service. My centuries of loyalty. Mrs. Holloway turned back to her. Do you know what they said? Maya shook her head. They thanked me. They said my sacrifice proved the law worked. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. The system I built discarded me the moment I stopped being useful. And there was no one to appeal to above the covens. No higher authority. Not for decades. What changed? Mrs. Holloway's expression shifted. The bitterness drained into something colder. Something that looked like fear dressed up as respect.
He did.
The king. 30 years ago, he emerged from isolation and unified the covens under one rule. One voice. One absolute power. She sat back down, her movements stiff. Before him, the laws were scattered. Regional. Cruel, but inconsistent. He made them universal. He made them final. So, he's worse than the covens.
No.
He's fair. And that's worse. Mrs. Holloway met Maya's eyes. The covens would kill you for feeding me out of spite.
Cruelty.
Politics. But the king? He'll kill you because it's correct. Because mercy that breaks the law is chaos. And chaos, to him, is the only true sin. Maya felt the weight of that settle on her shoulders. How long before he finds us? Mrs. Holloway was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, he already has. She pointed to the window. Maya stood and looked out through the gap in the curtains. Down in the street, burned into the asphalt near the movie theater entrance, was another symbol. The same crown. Closer this time. The lights started flickering on the 85th night. Maya noticed at the moment Mrs. Holloway lifted the thermos to her lips. The fluorescent tubes above booth 7 buzzed, dimmed, then flared bright enough to make Maya squint. When Mrs. Holloway finished drinking, the light settled back to normal. That's new, Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Holloway set the thermos down carefully. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They hadn't shaken in over a week. The feedings were working. She looked stronger. Healthier. That should have been good news. It's the resonance, Mrs. Holloway said quietly. The magic recognizes what's happening now. It's not just feeding anymore. It's pattern. Ritual. That makes it louder. Louder to who? Mrs. Holloway didn't answer. She just looked toward the window. Maya followed her gaze. The parking lot was empty except for Maya's decade-old Honda. But there, just visible under the streetlight, were new marks on the asphalt. Not crowns this time. These were different, circular symbols interconnected like chains. They formed a half-circle around the diner's entrance. When did those appear? Maya whispered. Sometime between midnight and now. Mrs. Holloway's voice was hollow. They're tracking marks. Triangulation points. Someone is narrowing the search. Maya's pulse hammered in her ears. She'd seen the crown symbols spreading through town over the past 2 weeks. One near the hospital, where she stole the blood. Another outside her apartment building. A third burned into the door of the movie theater below Mrs. Holloway's apartment. They were being circled.
Slowly.
Deliberately. We should stop, Maya said, though the words felt wrong in her mouth. Just for a while. Let things cool down. It won't matter, Mrs. Holloway stood, and for the first time since Maya had known her, She moved without hesitation, without pain. The feeding had given her back something essential. Stopping now won't erase what we've already done. The resonance is recorded. The pattern is marked. He knows. Then what do we do? Mrs. Holloway turned to face her fully. In the flickering light, she looked younger. Not human young, but vampire young. The way she must have looked centuries ago, before the covens discarded her. You run, Mrs. Holloway said.
Tonight.
You pack a bag, get in your car, and drive until you hit an ocean. You don't come back. I'm not leaving you, Maya. I'm not, Maya's voice cracked. You think I spent 85 nights stealing blood just to abandon you the second things get dangerous? You think I don't know what I signed up for? You don't, Mrs. Holloway's voice turned sharp. You're 24 years old. You work night shifts at a highway diner and live in a studio apartment with water damage. You have your whole life ahead of you. And I'm choosing to spend it keeping you alive. The words hung between them. Mrs. Holloway's expression broke. Just for a second. Just enough for Maya to see the centuries of loneliness underneath. I don't want to be the reason you die, she whispered. Then don't die on me, Maya said. Stay strong. Stay alive. Let me worry about the rest. Before Mrs. Holloway could respond, the lights went out completely. Not flickering this time. Just gone. The darkness was absolute. No streetlight glow from outside. No exit sign above the door. Even the faint green numbers on the microwave in the kitchen had vanished. Maya's breath caught. Mrs. Holloway? Don't move, the old woman's voice came from somewhere to the left. And don't speak. Maya froze. In the silence, she heard it. Footsteps. Not from inside the diner. From above it. On the roof.
Slow.
Measured. Impossibly heavy, as if something massive was walking across the aluminum panels without bothering to hide its presence. The footsteps moved from one end of the building to the other, then stopped, directly above booth 7. Maya's heart felt like it was going to crack her ribs open. Then, just as suddenly as they'd gone out, the lights came back on. The fluorescence buzzed angrily. The clock on the wall had reset to 12 o'clock, blinking red. The footsteps were gone. Maya's legs almost gave out. She grabbed the edge of the booth to steady herself. Mrs. Holloway stood perfectly still, her face drained of all color, even the faint flush the feeding had given her. He's here, she breathed. Not just close. Here. In the town. Maya forced herself to move. She walked to the front door on shaking legs and looked out into the parking lot. Her car was still there. But now, burned into the asphalt in a perfect circle around the entire diner, was a message written in symbols Maya couldn't read, but somehow understood. I see you. And beneath it, in English, carved so deeply the asphalt had melted.
Soon.
Maya stepped back from the door. Mrs. Holloway appeared beside her, and for the first time since they'd met, she took Maya's hand. When he comes, she said quietly, don't look him in the eyes. Don't speak unless he asks you a question. And don't, under any circumstances, try to protect me. Why not? Mrs. Holloway's grip tightened. Because the last human who showed him mercy didn't live long enough to regret it. 300 miles north, in a city whose name had changed 6 times since he last walked its streets, the vampire king opened his eyes. He had been still for 47 days. Not sleeping. Vampires of his age didn't sleep. Not hiding. Simply waiting in the basement of a building that used to be a church, then a warehouse, then something else he hadn't bothered to learn. The owners changed. The bricks remained. That was enough. But tonight, the waiting was over. He felt at the moment consciousness fully returned, a vibration in the ancient network, like a string pulled taut across centuries finally beginning to hum. Someone was breaking the hunger laws. Not in the usual ways. Not through violence or political rebellion or the tired protests of young vampires who thought themselves progressive. This was different. This was gentle. The king stood. His joints didn't crack. His muscles didn't ache. His body had stopped aging in 1523, the same year he'd stopped being fully human. Now he was something else. Something the covens whispered about but never named directly. He was the law made flesh. He walked up the stairs and out into the night. No one saw him leave. No one ever did unless he wanted them to. The city sprawled before him, glass towers and electric lights and the constant hum of machinery. He'd watched 1,000 cities rise and fall. This one would too, eventually. They always did. But right now, he wasn't interested in the city. He was interested in the echo. He closed his eyes and reached into the network, the invisible web of magic that connected every vampire to every other, a map written in blood and bound by the original laws. Most vampires could barely sense it. A few could read it. The king could manipulate it like a musician playing an instrument. And there, roughly 270 miles southeast, he felt the disturbance. A feeding. Sustained. Repeated. Human to vampire. Willingly given. That alone wasn't unusual. Humans fed vampires, all the time under the consent clauses. But this feeding had a signature he hadn't felt in decades.
Mercy.
Not lust. Not payment. Not even love, though that came close.
Pure un complicated mercy.
The kind that asked for nothing in return. The king opened his eyes. A faint smile touched his lips. Not from warmth, but from curiosity. Mercy was the rarest thing in his world. Rarer than power. Rarer than loyalty. It disrupted every calculation, every prediction, every carefully maintained balance. It was, by definition, chaos. And chaos always required his attention. He pulled a phone from his coat, a concession to modern convenience, and made a single call. It was answered before the first ring finished. My lord, the voice on the other end was careful, respectful, afraid. There's a disturbance in the southeast territory, the king said. Near the interstate junction. A diner, most likely. Find it. Should we intervene?
No.
A pause. My lord. I want to see the human myself. The king began walking. His steps were unhurried. Send scouts to observe. Mark the location. But no one touches her. No one even speaks to her. And the vampire being fed. The king stopped. He reached into the network again, focusing on the echo source. The vampire was old. Female. Weak enough that she should have faded decades ago. And yet she persisted. Identify her, he said. Full history. I want to know who she was before she became invisible. Yes, my lord. The king ended the call. He stood on the sidewalk as humans passed by on either side, none of them noticing the man in the dark coat who didn't quite cast a shadow correctly. They were too busy with their phones, their conversations, their small and fleeting lives. He envied them sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. The king tilted his head back and tasted the air. 300 miles was nothing. He could be there in a night if he pushed. But he wouldn't push. He would walk. He would let the anticipation build. Because this wasn't just about enforcing a law. This was about understanding why someone would break it knowing the cost. Why a human girl with nothing to gain would risk everything for a vampire the world had already forgotten. The king had lived for 5 centuries. He had seen empires collapse and religions rewrite themselves. He had watched the hunger laws hold civilization together through plague and war and the endless hunger that defined his kind. But he had never understood mercy. And what he didn't understand, he needed to see for himself. He began walking south. Behind him, the city continued its noise and light. Ahead of him, 270 miles away, a waitress was washing a thermos in a diner sink, unaware that the most dangerous creature in her world had just decided she was worth meeting. The king smiled again. This time, it almost reached his eyes. Maya's hands were steady as she reached into the blood bank refrigerator, but her heart was trying to break through her ribs. The donation center closed at 6. It was now 11:43 p.m. She'd parked 3 blocks away, walked through the employee entrance using a keycard she'd borrowed, stolen, from a nurse named Jennifer who sometimes came to the diner for coffee. Jennifer had left it on the counter 2 weeks ago. Maya had meant to return it. She hadn't. The refrigerator hummed in the darkness. Rows of blood bags hung like strange fruit, labeled and dated. Maya had learned the codes. O negative lasted longest. AB positive was rarer, but Mrs. Holloway said the type didn't matter anymore. Her body was too old to be selective. Maya grabbed 2 bags and shoved them into her backpack between a towel and her work apron. Then she heard the voice. Security to storage. We've got a motion sensor alert. The radio crackled from somewhere down the hall. Footsteps followed. Heavy boots on linoleum, getting closer. Maya's breath stopped. She couldn't go back the way she came. The hallway was a straight shot. She'd be seen immediately. The window was too small and painted shut. There was only one other exit. Through the main corridor, past the nurse's station, out the front doors. Right past whoever was coming. Maya zipped the backpack and slung it over her shoulder. She moved to the door and pressed herself against the wall, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside. Probably another raccoon in the vents. 3rd time this month. Just check it. Protocol. A flashlight beam cut across the floor near Maya's feet. She held her breath. The guard stepped into the doorway. His flashlight swept the room, across the refrigerator, the counter, the cabinet in the corner.
He paused.
The beam started to move toward Maya's position. Then his radio crackled again. Security, we need you up front. Someone's trying to get in the ER entrance. The guard sighed. Copy that. He took one more look around the room, then left. The footsteps faded. Maya waited 30 seconds. Then a minute. Then she ran. She moved through the corridor, past the dark nurse's station, past the empty waiting room with its outdated magazines and plastic chairs. The front doors were locked from the inside, but had a push-bar release. She hit it hard, and the alarm started screaming. Maya didn't stop. She sprinted across the parking lot, through the side street, past the closed hardware store and the gas station, and the Chinese restaurant that always smelled like grease. Her lungs burned. Her backpack slammed against her spine with every step. She didn't stop running until she reached her car. She threw herself into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and pulled out into the empty street. In her rearview mirror, she could see flashlight beams sweeping the area near the hospital entrance. They hadn't seen her. This time. 20 minutes later, Maya sat in her car outside the diner, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. The blood bags were in her backpack. She had stolen them. Not borrowed. Not found.
Stolen.
She could go to jail for this.
Lose her job.
Get blacklisted from every hospital in the state. And for what? To feed a vampire who told her repeatedly to stop. To break laws she barely understood for a woman who was going to die anyway, just a little slower now. Maya stared at the diner's lit windows. She thought about Mrs. Holloway sitting in booth 7 waiting. Getting weaker, every day Maya didn't come. Fading back into the things she'd been before. A forgotten ghost in a cardigan, counting down her last nights alone. Maya thought about the symbols burned into the asphalt. The footsteps on the roof. The words, I see you.
Soon.
She thought about what Mrs. Holloway had said. The last human who showed him mercy didn't live long enough to regret it. This wasn't kindness anymore. This was rebellion. And Maya had a choice. She could throw the blood bags in a dumpster, drive home, and never go back to the diner at night again. Let Mrs. Holloway fade. Let the king's attention move somewhere else. Save herself. Or she could walk through those doors, sit down in booth 7, and keep breaking the same law she'd been breaking for 87 nights, knowing exactly what was coming. Maya opened the car door. She grabbed her backpack. And she walked into the diner. Mrs. Holloway was sitting in their booth, hands folded, eyes closed. When she heard Maya's footsteps, she looked up. You came, she whispered. I'm not stopping, Maya said. She sat down and pulled the thermos from her bag. Not for him. Not for anyone. Mrs. Holloway's eyes glistened. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe. Maya started preparing the feeding. But at least I'll go down fighting. Outside, another symbol burned itself into the parking lot. This one looked like a countdown. 3 days. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was clear, stars visible through the diner windows. The next, Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fists, and thunder cracked so loud the coffee cups rattled in their saucers. Maya was wiping down the counter when the temperature dropped. Not gradually. All at once, as if someone had opened a door to winter. Her breath misted in front of her face. The clock on the wall stopped. The second hand froze between the 4 and 5. The fluorescent lights dimmed to almost nothing, casting the diner in shades of gray. And Mrs. Holloway, sitting in booth 7 with a newspaper she'd been pretending to read, went completely rigid. "He's here," she breathed. The door opened. No bell chimed. No gust of wind came through. The door simply opened, smooth and silent, and a man stepped inside. He wasn't what Maya expected. She'd imagined a monster, something with red eyes and fangs, draped in a cloak like the vampires in old movies. Something obviously dangerous. Instead, he looked ordinary. Tall, but not unusually so. Maybe 6 feet. Dark hair, neatly trimmed. A black coat that looked expensive, but not flashy. His face was angular, handsome in a way that was hard to place, like a painting you'd seen before, but couldn't remember where. But his eyes were old. Not in appearance. They looked young, dark, clear. But when Maya met them for just a second, she felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her. She looked away immediately, remembering Mrs. Holloway's warning. Don't look him in the eyes. The man closed the door behind him. The rain continued outside, but no water dripped from his coat. His shoes weren't wet. It was as if the storm didn't quite touch him. He walked to the counter with measured steps and sat on one of the stools. 3 seats away from where Maya stood frozen, cloth still in her hand. Time felt wrong. Too slow. Like moving through water. "Coffee," he said quietly. His voice was smooth, unaccented, the kind of voice that could belong to anyone from anywhere. "Black." Maya's hands moved before her brain caught up. She grabbed the pot, thankfully still warm, and poured a cup. It took everything in her not to let the cup rattle against the saucer. She set it in front of him. He didn't touch it. Just looked at it, then looked at her. "You're Maya." It wasn't a question. She nodded because her voice had stopped working. "And you've been feeding the woman in booth 7 for 91 nights," he still hadn't blinked. "Stolen blood. Hospital supply. Risking arrest, risking your job, risking laws you barely understand." Maya's throat felt like sandpaper. "Yes."
Why?
The question hung in the air. Maya glanced toward Mrs. Holloway. The old woman sat perfectly still, her face drained of all color. Her hands were clenched on the table, so tight her knuckles had gone white. She looked terrified. Maya looked back at the king. Because she was starving. Many people starve. You don't feed them all. I could reach her. That's not an answer. Maya's fear started shifting into something else. Something sharper. What answer do you want? She needed help. I could help. So I did. The king tilted his head slightly, like a bird studying something small and curious. "Do you know who she is?" "Mrs. Holloway." "Do you know who she was?" Maya hesitated. "She told me. She helped write your laws." "She didn't just help." The king's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "She authored the second law. The one that condemned her." He finally picked up the coffee cup, but didn't drink. Just held it, steam rising around his fingers. "She built the cage she's dying in. Does that change anything for you?"
No.
"Why not?" "Because people deserve to survive their mistakes." The king went very still. For the first time since entering, something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Not surprise. Something else. Something that looked almost like interest. He set the coffee cup down untouched. Then he stood. Maya's pulse spiked. This was it. This was where he killed her, or worse. But the king didn't move toward her. He walked to booth 7. Mrs. Holloway looked up at him, and Maya saw something she'd never seen before in the old woman's face. Absolute submission. The kind of submission that came from knowing resistance was impossible. "Magistrate Holloway," the king said softly. "It's been a long time." "My lord," her voice was barely a whisper. He studied her for a long moment. Then he looked around the diner, At the checkered floor, the outdated jukebox in the corner, the handwritten menu on the wall. This place, he said, is now neutral ground. Temporary protection under the old custom. 3 days. Mrs. Holloway's eyes went wide. My lord. 3 days, he repeated. Then he looked at Maya. After that, I return. And we finish this conversation. He walked to the door. Maya found her voice. What happens in 3 days? The king paused, his hand on the door. I decide, he said, whether mercy is weakness or wisdom. Then he was gone. The door closed. The lights came back to full brightness. The clock started ticking again. The temperature rose. And Maya realized she'd just been given a death sentence with a 72-hour delay. Maya didn't move for a full minute after the king left. The rain had stopped. The storm vanished as suddenly as it came, leaving the parking lot slick and black under the streetlights. Through the window, Maya could see her breath still fogging in the cold air trapped inside the diner. Mrs. Holloway broke the silence first. 3 days, her voice cracked. He gave us 3 days. Maya finally moved. Her legs felt weak, but she walked to booth 7 and collapsed into the seat across from Mrs. Holloway. What does that mean? Neutral ground? Old custom? It means Mrs. Holloway's hands were shaking again, worse than they had in weeks. It means he's not going to kill us. Not yet. The old custom is ancient, older than the hunger laws. It states that any place can be declared temporary sanctuary if the king wills it. While it stands, no vampire can act against anyone inside.
Not even him.
So we're safe? For 3 days, Mrs. Holloway looked at her with hollow eyes. And then he comes back. Maya's mind raced. Why? Why not just finish it? If he's going to punish us, why wait? Because he wants to understand. Mrs. Holloway's voice steadied slightly, falling into the tone of someone who'd spent centuries studying law. The king doesn't act on impulse.
Ever.
He could have killed us both the moment he walked through that door.
He didn't.
That means something about this situation doesn't fit his calculations. What doesn't fit? You, Mrs. Holloway, met her eyes. Your mercy. He said it himself. He needs to decide if it's weakness or wisdom. That's not a question he can answer by executing us. He needs to observe. Maya felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature. So, we're an experiment. We're a problem he hasn't encountered before. Mrs. Holloway leaned back against the vinyl booth. In 500 years of enforcing the laws, he's seen every kind of rebellion. Violence, politics, passion, greed. But genuine mercy? Mercy that costs everything and gains nothing? That's, she trailed off. Rare? Extinct. Or it was supposed to be. Mrs. Holloway's expression shifted into something sad and distant. The laws were designed to eliminate it. Mercy creates unpredictability. It makes vampires spare humans who should die. It makes humans protect vampires who should fade. It disrupts the balance. Maybe the balance deserves to be disrupted. Mrs. Holloway almost smiled. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets humans killed. Maya stood and walked to the window. Outside, the symbols in the parking lot were still there, crown marks and chains and the countdown that now read 2 days. But something was different. There was a new symbol. A circle with a line through it, burned into the asphalt right in front of the diner entrance. What's that one mean? Maya asked. Mrs. Holloway came to stand beside her. When she saw it, her breath caught. Protection mark. It's official now. No vampire can cross that line for 3 days without violating the king's direct order. Would they? Not if they want to survive. Mrs. Holloway touched the window glass. The king doesn't bluff. If he declared this neutral ground, it's safer than a church. Safer than anything. They stood there in silence, watching the empty highway. Finally, Maya spoke. What do you think he's doing right now? Research. Mrs. Holloway's voice was certain. He's learning everything about me. Everything I did before I was discarded. He's building a profile, understanding the context. She paused. And he's trying to understand you. There's nothing to understand. I'm a waitress who didn't want to watch someone starve. That's everything to understand. Mrs. Holloway turned to face her. You have no connection to our world. No vampire blood in your family line. I'd smell it. No political agenda.
No hidden motive.
You're just.
Good.
And that terrifies him. Why would goodness terrify anyone? Because it can't be controlled, can't be predicted, can't be legislated. Mrs. Holloway's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The king has spent 5 centuries creating order from chaos. He's eliminated every variable, answered every question, solved every problem. But genuine goodness? That's the one thing his laws can't account for. Because it doesn't follow rules. It doesn't need reasons. It just
Is.
Maya looked at her reflection in the dark window. She looked tired.
Small. Completely ordinary.
So, what happens in 3 days? Mrs. Holloway was quiet for a long moment. He'll come back, she finally said. He'll have his answer. And then he'll either change the world, she stopped. Or what? Mrs. Holloway's reflection in the glass looked older than ever. Or he'll eliminate the problem that threatens it. Outside, another symbol burned itself into the asphalt.
Not a countdown this time.
A question mark. Even the king, it seemed, didn't know what came next. The movie theater had been closed for 11 years. The king stood in front of it at dawn, watching the sun paint the broken marquee in shades of rust and gold. The letters still spelled their meaningless message. RT Imende HO. He'd seen Mrs. Holloway's apartment from the network, felt its location pulsing in the magic like a weak heartbeat. But he wasn't here for her apartment. He was here for what lay beneath it. The king walked around to the alley behind the building. The back door had been chained shut, but chains meant nothing to him. He touched the lock and it opened, metal groaning as if grateful to finally give up. Inside, the theater was a cathedral of dust and decay. Rows of seats faced a blank screen. The ceiling had collapsed in places, letting in shafts of morning light that illuminated floating particles. Everything smelled like mold and old velvet, and time. But underneath that, faint and almost forgotten, was another smell.
Blood.
Old blood. Vampire blood. The king walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing. He wasn't looking at the seats or the screen. He was looking at the walls. There, hidden beneath years of water damage and peeling wallpaper, were carvings. The same kind he'd seen in Mrs. Holloway's apartment, but older.
Deeper.
These weren't documentation. These were original. The king approached the east wall and pulled away a strip of rotted paper. Beneath it, carved into the plaster in elegant script, were the hunger laws. All 3 of them, in their original form, written in 1247. He traced his fingers over the second law, and oh, vampire survives beyond usefulness. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a signature. Magistrate E. Holloway, Eastern Coven, Year of Consolidation. The king stood very still. He'd known she was one of the authors. That was in the records. But records didn't show this place, this theater that had been something else before. A meeting hall, perhaps. Or a court. He closed his eyes and reached deeper into the network, not searching forward but backward, pulling on threads of memory stored in blood and stone. And he saw it. A memory. Not his, but collective. Shared. The hall was full of vampires. 40, maybe 50. All of them old. All of them powerful. This was before the covens were unified, when each region made its own laws, and the only rule was survival. At the front of the hall stood a woman. Younger then. Stronger. Her voice carried authority. We are not animals, she said. We are eternal. And eternity requires structure. The crowd murmured. Some agreed. Others resisted. The humans hunt us because we are chaos, she continued. Because we take too much, kill too often, create new vampires without thought. We must regulate ourselves before they exterminate us. And how do you propose we do that? An older vampire, skeptical. 3 laws, she said. 3 absolutes. No feeding without consent, it creates war. No survival beyond usefulness, it creates weakness. No mercy that disrupts order, it creates chaos. Who decides usefulness? We do. The strong. The necessary. those who serve the continuation of our kind. The vote was called. The laws passed. And Magistrate Holloway carved them into the wall herself, believing she had saved her people. The king opened his eyes. The memory faded, but the weight of it remained. She had believed it. That was the part that struck him. She hadn't been cruel. She'd been a true believer. She thought she was building something that would last forever, that would protect her kind from extinction. She'd never imagined she'd live long enough to be consumed by it. The king moved deeper into the theater. There were more carvings here, names of vampires who'd attended that first meeting. He recognized some of them.
Most were dust now,
Faded by time or by the very laws they'd created. But one name made him stop. Magistrate V. Thorne, Northern Coven. His own name. From before he was king. From when he was just another vampire trying to survive in a world that wanted him dead. He'd been there. The memory came back slowly. He'd been young then, only a century old. He'd voted yes. He believed, just like Holloway, that structure was survival. And for 500 years, he'd enforced those laws without question. Because they worked. They kept the covens alive. They prevented the chaos that had nearly destroyed them during the Dark Ages. They created predictability in a world that thrived on destruction. But standing here, in this forgotten theater, looking at the names of vampires who'd written their own death sentences without knowing it, the king felt something he hadn't felt in decades.
doubt.
Not about the law itself. The law was still necessary, still correct, but about what it had cost. He looked back at Holloway's signature, carved with such certainty, such pride. She'd helped build a system that erased its own founders. And he'd inherited it, enforced it, perfected it. The king turned and walked back up the aisle, past the rotting seats, past the blank screen, back into the alley where sunlight waited. He had 2 days left to decide.
Mercy or law?
Chaos or order. The problem was, for the first time in 500 years, he wasn't certain which was which. The trucks arrived on the second night. Maya noticed them during her shift, 2 black pickups with tinted windows, parked across the highway at the rest stop. They'd been there for 3 hours, engines off, but she could see the glow of cigarettes in the cab of one. Watching. They're not vampires, Mrs. Holloway said from booth 7. She'd been staying at the diner since the king's visit, too afraid to go back to her apartment. Maya had brought her a blanket and pillow. The other waitresses assumed she was homeless. They weren't entirely wrong. How do you know? Maya refilled her coffee cup, actual coffee this time, not blood. Mrs. Holloway had been drinking it to appear normal. Vampires don't smoke. And they don't sit in cars for hours. Too confined, Mrs. Holloway's eyes stayed fixed on the trucks. Those are hunters. Maya's stomach dropped. Like vampire hunters. The only kind that matter, Mrs. Holloway's voice was tight. They must have traced the magical disturbance. Our feeding created ripples. The king could sense it, which means others can too. Hunters use different methods, but they're looking for the same thing. What do they want? To kill me. And anyone protecting me. Mrs. Holloway finally looked away from the window. Maya, you need to leave. Clock out early. Go home. Let me. We've had this conversation. Maya topped off the coffee pot and set it back on the warmer. I'm not leaving. These aren't vampires bound by the king's protection order. They're human. The neutral ground means nothing to them. Then we call the police. And tell them what? That vampire hunters are staking out a diner. Mrs. Holloway's laugh was bitter. The police don't know our world exists. By the time they'd respond to a noise complaint, we'd already be dead. Maya looked back at the trucks. One of them was moving now, pulling out of the rest stop. It drove slowly past the diner, and she got a glimpse of the driver. Middle-aged, weathered face, eyes that swept across the windows with professional intensity. The truck continued down the highway and disappeared. But 5 minutes later, it came back from the other direction.
Circling.
At midnight, Maya locked the front door. Danny had left hours ago. It was just her and Mrs. Holloway now, and the diner felt smaller with the darkness pressed against the windows. They're going to come in, Mrs. Holloway said quietly. She was standing now, looking healthier than she had in weeks, but also more afraid. Tonight or tomorrow. They'll wait until they're sure, then they'll strike. Maya checked her phone. No signal, that was new. It had been fine an hour ago. They're jamming it, Mrs. Holloway said, seeing her expression. Standard protocol. Cut communications, isolate the target, move in fast. How do you know so much about hunters? I helped train some of them. Centuries ago, when the covens and certain human factions had treaties, Mrs. Holloway moved away from the window. I taught them how we think, how we hunt, how to kill us efficiently. Maya stared at her. You train people to kill vampires. I thought it would create balance. Mutual deterrence. Mrs. Holloway's expression was haunted. I didn't realize I was just giving them better tools for extermination. Before Maya could respond, glass shattered. The front window exploded inward, and something metal clattered across the floor, a canister, spewing thick gray smoke. Maya's eyes immediately started burning. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Through the smoke, she heard the front door being kicked open. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Heavy boots. Vampires in the back booth. A man's voice, rough and commanding. Human female up front. Restrain her but don't harm. We need to question her. Maya felt hands grab her arms. She tried to fight, but whoever held her was strong, much stronger than her. She was forced down onto her knees, zip ties cutting into her wrists. Through the smoke, she could barely make out shapes moving toward booth 7.
No.
Maya screamed, but the smoke choked her voice. Then the temperature dropped. Not like when the king arrived. This was different. Colder.
Faster.
Violent. The smoke swirled suddenly, pulled toward the door as if sucked out by a vacuum. And in the clearing air, Maya saw him. The king stood in the doorway. He wasn't in his coat anymore. His sleeves were rolled up. His eyes were no longer dark. They glowed faintly red, like embers. And he looked angry. This place, he said quietly, is under my protection. One of the hunters raised a crossbow. We don't answer to. He didn't finish the sentence. The king moved faster than Maya's eyes could track. One moment he was at the door. The next he was standing in front of the hunter, holding the crossbow in one hand. He crushed it like aluminum foil. Leave, the king said.
Now.
The hunter, who'd been holding Maya, released her immediately. She fell forward, catching herself on her bound hands. The hunters retreated, all 4 of them, backing toward the shattered window, keeping their eyes on the king but moving with the speed of people who knew they were outmatched. The vampire's already dead, one of them said. You're just delaying. She's under my protection. The king's voice didn't rise, but somehow it filled the entire diner. Harm her, and you declare war on every coven in this hemisphere. Do you understand? The hunters disappeared into the night. Maya heard engines starting, tires screeching, then silence. The king turned and looked down at her. The red glow faded from his eyes. Are you hurt? Maya shook her head, unable to speak. He knelt and broke the zip ties with his bare hands like they were made of paper. 2 days, he said quietly. That's all the protection I can give. Then he was gone. Mrs. Holloway made her request at dawn. Maya was sweeping up the broken glass from the window. Danny had already called someone to board it up temporarily when the old woman appeared beside her. I want to eat, Mrs. Holloway said. Maya paused mid-sweep. You've been drinking coffee all week.
No.
I want to eat. Mrs. Holloway's voice was steady, but there was something final in it. Real food. Solid food. One last time. Maya's chest tightened. Last time? It will kill me, Mrs. Holloway said it matter-of-factly, like announcing the weather. My body stopped processing human food 300 years ago. If I eat it now, my system will shut down within hours. Then why? Because I want to die human. Mrs. Holloway's eyes were clear.
Certain.
I want to taste something other than blood. I want to remember what it felt like before I became this. And I want to do it here, in this place with you. Maya set the broom down. Her hands were shaking. Mrs. Holloway. Eleanor, the old woman, smiled faintly. My name is Eleanor. I haven't said it out loud in 60 years. Eleanor, Maya's voice cracked. You don't have to do this. We have one more day. Maybe the king will. The king will do what he must. And so will I. Eleanor looked around the diner. At the worn booths, the cracked vinyl, the menu board with its faded specials. I've spent 700 years surviving. I think it's time I tried living. Even if it's just for one meal. Maya cooked everything. Pancakes with real maple syrup. Scrambled eggs with cheese. Bacon, crispy, the way Eleanor said she remembered from childhood. Hash browns. Toast with butter. Orange juice. She laid it all out on the table in booth 7 as the sun rose higher outside, painting the diner in gold. Eleanor stared at the food like it was a miracle. I don't even know if I remember how, she whispered. It's like riding a bike, Maya said, though her throat was so tight she could barely speak. Eleanor picked up a fork. Her hands trembled. She cut a small piece of pancake, dragged it through syrup, and lifted it to her mouth. She closed her eyes,
Chewed slowly.
and a tear rolled down her cheek. Oh, she breathed. Oh, I forgot. I forgot how sweet things could be. She ate slowly, methodically, savoring every bite. The eggs, the bacon, the toast. Between bites, she told Maya stories about growing up in a village that didn't exist anymore, about her first love who died of plague, about the vampire who turned her and promised her eternity. He said I'd never be hungry again, Eleanor said, eating hash browns with her fingers like a child. He was wrong. I've been hungry every day since. Just not for food. Maya sat across from her, watching, memorizing every moment. What were you hungry for? Purpose. Connection. Something that mattered beyond just surviving another century. Eleanor set down her fork. 3/4 of the food was gone. I thought the laws would give me that. I thought building structure would mean something. But structure without compassion is just a beautiful cage. She drank the orange juice in one long swallow, then leaned back against the booth with a deep, satisfied sigh. Thank you, Maya. For what? For seeing me. For feeding me when I was invisible. For breaking laws you didn't understand because you understood something more important. Eleanor's voice was getting softer. Tired. You gave me back my humanity. Not by making me human. I'll never be that again. But by treating me like I still mattered. Maya reached across the table and took her hand. You do matter. I know, Eleanor smiled. I didn't before. But I do now. The king arrived as the sun reached its peak. He entered through the boarded-up window, not breaking it, simply appearing inside, as if the wood meant nothing. Maya stood immediately, positioning herself between him and Eleanor. But Eleanor raised a hand. It's all right. The king looked at the table, at the empty plates, at Eleanor's face, which had more color in it than it had in years, but was also clearly fading. You ate, he said quietly. I did. You're dying. Yes. The king was silent for a long moment. Then he did something Maya didn't expect. He sat down in the booth, across from Eleanor. Why? He asked. Eleanor met his eyes without fear. Because I helped write laws that forgot what it meant to be alive. I enforced structure that erased mercy. I built something strong and cold and perfect. She paused. And in 700 years, this waitress showed me more humanity than I'd shown anyone in centuries. I wanted to honor that. I wanted to die remembering what it felt like to be more than just law and hunger. The king looked at Maya, then back to Eleanor. You helped create the system that destroyed you. I did. And now you reject it? No, Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper now. I reject what it became, what we let it become. The king said nothing. He simply sat there, watching, as Eleanor Holloway, magistrate, lawgiver, architect of vampire civilization, closed her eyes for the last time. She died with the taste of maple syrup still on her lips. And for the first time in 500 years, the vampire king didn't know if he'd just witnessed justice or tragedy. The king stayed until sunset.
He didn't speak.
Didn't move. Just sat in booth 7 across from Eleanor's body, watching as the color drained from her face and her skin turned the gray of old paper. Maya sat in the booth behind them, unable to leave, unable to look away. When Eleanor finally turned to dust, the way all vampires did eventually, their bodies returning to the earth they'd been denied for centuries, the king caught the ashes before they scattered. He held them in his palm, weighing them as if trying to measure the worth of 700 years. Then he stood. "Come with me," he said to Maya. It wasn't a request. They walked behind the diner, where the dumpsters were and the asphalt gave way to gravel and weeds. The king stopped at the edge of the property, where the highway lights didn't quite reach. He knelt and dug into the ground with his bare hands. The earth moved aside easily, as if it knew better than to resist him. When the hole was deep enough, he released Eleanor's ashes into it. They fell like gray snow. Then he stood and looked at Maya. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked. Maya's voice was steady. "I kept someone alive. You broke a law that has held for 8 centuries. You created a precedent. You showed that mercy can exist outside the structure." He paused. "And you did it knowingly, deliberately, even after I warned you." "Yes." The king studied her in the darkness. "You're not afraid of me." "I'm terrified of you." Maya met his eyes, really met them for the first time. "But fear doesn't change what's right. And you believe you were right?" "I believe Eleanor deserved better than to starve alone in a world that forgot her." Maya's voice cracked. "I believe laws that erase their own creators are broken. And I believe if mercy is treason, then maybe your system needs traitors." The king went very still. For a moment, Maya thought she'd gone too far. That this was where he killed her, where the protection ended and the punishment began. Instead, he did something impossible. He smiled. Not a cruel smile, not mocking. Just tired. And maybe a little sad. "You sound like her," he said quietly. "Like Eleanor when she was young. When she still believed laws could be perfect." "I don't believe in perfect," Maya said. "I just believe in better." The king looked back at the grave. "I was at the meeting when those laws were written. I voted yes. I believed, just as she did, that structure was survival. And for 8 centuries, I've enforced that belief without question." He paused. "But tonight, watching her die after choosing to taste sweetness one last time, I realized something." "What?" "That a law designed to protect us from chaos has instead created a different kind of chaos. The chaos of forgetting why we wanted to survive in the first place." He turned back to her. "Eleanor didn't die because she was weak. She died because she chose humanity over existence. And that choice, that shouldn't be treason." Maya's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the law is not wrong, but its application has become too rigid, too absolute." The king's voice was measured, careful, as if he was working through the thought even as he spoke it. "The second law states that no vampire survives beyond usefulness." "But usefulness to whom?" "To what?" "If a vampire wishes to fade, that is their choice. But if a human chooses to help them persist, if mercy is given freely, without coercion, then that is not chaos. That is balance." "You're changing the law." "I'm clarifying it." The king looked at the sky, where stars were beginning to appear. "As of tonight, mercy freely given is not treason. It is permitted, not encouraged, not mandated, but permitted." Maya felt tears on her face and didn't bother wiping them away. Eleanor would have liked that. Eleanor created the problem. You solved it. The king walked past her, back toward the diner. "The hunters won't return. I've erased this place from all records, human and vampire. As far as the network is concerned, nothing happened here. You never fed her. I never came. The past 3 months are void." "What about me?" The king stopped at the diner's back door. "You're not an exception, Maya. You're a precedent. The first human to show mercy under the new interpretation." He pulled open the door. "That means others will follow. And when they do, they won't be punished for kindness." He started to step inside, then paused. "She died human," he said quietly. "That matters. Thank you for giving her that." Then he was gone. Maya stood alone in the darkness, beside a grave that held the ashes of a woman who'd lived 700 years and died tasting maple syrup. Above her, the stars wheeled on. And somewhere in the vampire network, quietly, without announcement or ceremony, a single line of law was rewritten in blood and silence. Mercy freely given shall not be condemned. The king's signature burned beneath it, absolute and final. The first change in 800 years. 3 weeks passed. The window got fixed. The burn marks in the parking lot faded, not naturally, but overnight, as if someone had erased them deliberately. The thermos Maya had used to feed Eleanor sat in the back of her locker at work, cleaned but empty. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Life returned to normal, or what passed for normal. Danny complained about inventory. The morning crowd wanted their coffee hot and their eggs over easy. The highway stretched on endlessly, bringing travelers who stayed for 20 minutes and left without knowing the diner had been ground zero for a change that rippled through an entire hidden world. But Maya noticed things. Small things. The man who came in at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday and ordered only coffee, black, his hands too steady, his reflection in the window slightly delayed. He left a $50 tip for a $3 cup and nodded to Maya like he knew her. The woman who sat in booth 7, Eleanor's booth, and stared at the menu for 15 minutes without reading it, her eyes ancient and tired. She ordered nothing, but when she left, there was a silver coin on the table, older than any currency Maya recognized. The teenager who stumbled in just before dawn, eyes wild, fangs barely concealed, looking terrified and lost. Maya had poured her coffee and slid her a napkin with an address written on it, a safe house, one she'd learned about from a whispered conversation she'd overheard between two vampires who thought she wasn't listening. The girl had left crying, grateful, human enough still to remember what gratitude felt like. They came in ones and twos, never causing trouble, never staying long, but they came. And Maya understood. The diner had become something new. Not a feeding ground. Not a vampire haven. A rest stop. A neutral space. A place where the old laws bent just enough to let mercy breathe. On the 32nd night after Eleanor died, Maya was wiping down the counter when she felt the temperature drop. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Booth 7 is open, she said. The king sat down without a word. Maya poured coffee and brought it to him. He'd actually drunk it last time. She'd seen the cup empty when he left. How many? He asked quietly. Maya didn't pretend not to understand. 17. In 3 weeks. That's more than I expected. Word travels fast, apparently. Even in your world. The king wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. They're calling this place a sanctuary. Some of the older vampires are. Displeased. Maya's heart skipped, but she kept her voice level. Are you here to shut it down? No, he took a sip. I'm here to make sure you understand what you've become. A waitress? A symbol. The king set down his cup. The human who changed vampire law. The one who showed mercy, without asking permission. They'll test you. Some will come seeking help. Others will come seeking weakness to exploit. You need to be careful. I've been careful for 3 weeks. You've been lucky for 3 weeks, but his tone wasn't harsh. Almost.
Concerned.
I can't protect you indefinitely. The neutral ground declaration was temporary. It's expired. Maya felt cold. So anyone could.
Could.
But won't. The king's eyes met hers. Because I've let it be known that anyone who harms you answers to me personally. That protection is indefinite. But it only works if you're smart. If you don't take unnecessary risks. Like feeding ancient vampires? The corner of his mouth twitched. Like that. They sat in silence for a moment. Do you regret it? Maya asked. Changing the law. The king considered the question. I regret that it took 700 years and one human waitress to see what Eleanor and I should have seen when we wrote it.
But no.
I don't regret the change, he stood. The law is stronger now. More just. That matters. He pulled out a small card and placed it on the counter. It was blank except for a phone number written in silver ink. If something happens that you can't handle, he said. Call that number.
Once.
I'll answer. Maya picked up the card. Why are you helping me? Because you're right, the king walked to the door. Laws that forget mercy aren't worth following. And people who show mercy when it costs them everything deserve to be protected, he paused. Eleanor died human.
But
You're teaching us how to stay human while being something else. That's more valuable than you know. Then he was gone. Maya stood alone in the diner. She looked at the card, then at booth 7, where a woman who'd lived 700 years had tasted sweetness one last time. Outside, a semi-truck pulled into the parking lot. The driver, eyes too bright, movements too fluid, came inside and sat at the counter. Coffee, please, he said quietly. And maybe a safe place to rest for an hour? Maya smiled and reached for the pot. Coming right up. The night stretched on. The highway hummed. And in a small diner where mercy had rewritten ancient law, a human waitress poured coffee for travelers who were more than they seemed. The world had changed. Quietly. One cup at a time.
The end.